haga de olvido. Si alguna vez fue amada o tiene amor escondido. Ay, 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 amor. Eres la rosa que me da calor. Eres el sueño de mi soledad. Un letargo de azul, un eclipse de mar. Pero ay, 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 amor. Yo soy satélite y tú eres mi sol. Un universo de agua mineral, un espacio de luz que solo llenas tú. Ay, amor. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, ay, ay. Te regalo mis manos, mis párpados caídos, el beso más profundo, el que se ahoga en un gemido. Oh, oh, oh. Te regalo un otoño, un día entre abril y junio, un rayo de ilusiones, un corazón al desnudo. Ay, 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 amor. Eres la rosa que me da calor. Eres el sueño de mi soledad. Un letargo de azul, un eclipse de mar, vida. Ay, 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 amor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vianney Lubis, and I am the Vice President of Audience and Engagement at Hispanic Executive. And I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the final Latino ERG Exchange of 2023, hosted by Hispanic Executive in partnership with DRR Advisors. And the Latino ERG Exchange series was built to create a space where Latino ERG leaders can openly discuss their most pressing questions and topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And we hope to help facilitate a real exchange of ideas, lessons learned, and practical information, with the goal being that by hearing and learning from each other, we can all implement best practices in our organizations for effective and long-lasting change. So on that note, let's get started. Today's event is an Ask Me Anything Q&A format. And so we encourage you to bring your most pressing questions. Dr. Robert Rodriguez here with me of DRR Advisors will take the lead in answering your questions. And he is joined today by a very special guest, Kristin Coleman. Kristin is the Executive Director, Head of Employee Engagement for Advancing Hispanics and Latinos at JPMorgan Chase. And she's also going to share insights, of course, and help answer questions today. So amigos and amigas, don't be shy, ask away. We want to hear from these two experts today. And lastly, I do want to thank our sponsors of this series, AARP, Capital One, Deloitte, and Liberty Mutual, for their ongoing support and commitment to recruiting, retaining, developing Latino professionals, and also for empowering their own ERG leaders and members with the resources to continue to learn and grow and drive maximum impact. So thank you all so very much for your support. And with that, join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Rodriguez. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Vianney. Thank you all for joining us here today. Yeah, I was just thinking, we launched the first Latino ERG Exchange back in 2020, excuse me, when COVID hit. So I think we're in number 7 or 8. These keep getting better and better. Many of you have joined us for several of these Latino ERG exchanges. And as Vianney mentioned, we want to provide all of you an opportunity to not just connect and maybe get to know each other. Feel free to use the chat feature if you want to connect with many of the several hundred people on this call. But also, we want to give you a chance to ask some of the most pressing questions that you may have. So I'm excited to be able to leverage some of my extensive experience with employee resource groups, and in particular, working with many Hispanic, Latino, Latinx ERGs, which is kind of what we're going to focus on here today. I'm excited about having Kristin as my guest. We'll be having her answer some questions as well. Yeah, we're excited about seeing what's on your mind. So I'm calling today. I'm not in my home office, as you can tell. I'm actually, I think, in Minneapolis today. I'm in the middle of a busy travel session. So hopefully you can see me and hear me okay. But like they say, let's get the show started. So let me, some of you were very kind to submit some questions ahead of time. So we're going to start maybe with answering a few of those. I'll turn it to Kristin. And then, yeah, we'll get on to some of your live questions that you may have, because we want to see what's on your mind. Or some of you may have some questions based on some of our responses to the questions that were submitted. So let's start. So question number one, we have a question here submitted by Veronica Berus, I believe is how you pronounce it. And her question is, Robert, how are ERGs typically funded at large companies? And what is the best practice in terms of a funding model for ERG? So great question, Veronica. So there's a couple things, how companies fund their ERGs. It does tend to vary. Some of the most common kind of methods used are where every ERG gets the same amount, regardless of how big or how small they are. Companies say, well, hey, we have 8 ERGs. Each ERG is going to get 10,000, and you all decide how to use it. So that's one approach. There are some companies that give their ERGs that are larger more money. So maybe if you're a larger ERG, you'll get more money than one of the smaller ERGs. We've seen that model, and then we've also seen a model where it's more set by a business plan. The ERGs have to kind of put together their strategic plan, which is happening a lot of companies right now for 2024. An ERG will come back and say, this is our plan for next year. And in order to execute on this plan, we think we need this amount of funding. And then the company decides whether they can provide that or not. So those are the three most common methods I've seen for funding. Now, with regards to what's an average amount, right now, if I were to kind of estimate it based on some of the data I've seen, the average funding given to all ERGs, not just the Latino ERG, is approximately $90 per member. And by looking at it per member, that's the only way to measure large companies with small companies. So for example, if your Latino ERG has 100 members, however you define that, well, on average, Latino ERG of that size gets an annual budget of $9,000. If your Latino ERG has 200 members, well, on average, your Latino ERG of that size is getting $18,000. So $90 per member, it's a good data point. So that means that's average. So half companies give more than that, half companies give less than that. But it's a good data point for you to use to say, hey, how might you compare to other companies? So Veronica, hopefully that helped you with your initial question. Thank you again for pre-submitting it. Let's go on to question number 2. We're going to go through these kind of rapid styles. So that way we can get to as many questions as possible. We have a question here from Miriam Simon. And Miriam's question is, what are the payoffs for EBRG leaders? Are companies beginning to provide any monetary rewards or compensations for their teams as official officers? So great question. So we are starting to see some early trends, Miriam, where companies are providing, let's just say, remuneration to their ERG leaders. And again, what the data is telling me is about 1/3 of companies do that. So it's not the majority. It's still more the exception than the norm. So about 33% of companies provide remuneration. But within that 33% that do, how that remuneration, kind of the format it takes does vary. So for example, some companies, their remuneration is more of a perk. So they'll say, hey, our ERG leaders will get assigned an executive sponsor, or our ERG leaders get to have lunch with the CEO, or our ERG leaders get more PTO time, or maybe they get to participate in an exclusive leadership development program. So the reward for the ERG leaders is more of a it's more like a perk, so to speak. Now, there are some companies that do provide a stipend or bonus to their ERG leaders. Sometimes it's 5,000, 10,000. I know one company in particular that gives each one of their ERG leaders 15,000 in company stock. So we do see some of that. That's a trend that's still relatively small, but one that's starting to pick up some momentum. And then the new area we're starting to see is something that I would call talent share, where companies are going to their ERG leaders and saying, hey, don't do the ERG work on top of your day job. We want to incorporate that ERG leadership role into your day job. So some companies are allowing their ERG leaders to allocate 5, 10, maybe up to 20% of their time to run the ERG. So they don't get added compensation, but their ERG leadership role becomes part of their job and not in addition to their job. And I think the reason we're starting to see that is because ERGs are adding more value. You've extended your value proposition, you're making a significant impact, and companies are starting to recognize that through increased remuneration. So thank you for that question, Miriam. I'm going to go through a couple more, and I want to make sure to turn over to my friend Kristin because she's super smart, and I want to give her a chance to answer as many questions as possible. We have a question here submitted by Yaritza Urado. Her question is, what training can be provided to ERG leaders that may tie the organization's overall D&I strategy to their ERG? So, good question. We are starting to see more and more companies provide development specifically to their ERG leaders that's very much tied to their role of ERG leaders. For example, we see some companies host ERG summits. I was just in Boston yesterday for the ERG summit for Sanofi. Last week I was in Miami for the ERG summit for Chewy. And the reason I'm in Minneapolis today is because Allianz Life is having their ERG summit. So during those summits, they often provide training to their ERG leaders on just how to be stronger leaders, right? So we see some of that training provided in that manner, and in many cases, it does align, with DE&I. We also see what I would call ERG leadership academies, where the company will provide training on a consistent basis. Maybe it's every other month or once a quarter. And they'll provide training to their ERG leaders on very specific topics such as, how to elevate member engagement, how to establish ERG metrics that matter, how to work more effectively with your executive sponsor, how to develop an ERG strategic plan. So the training provided to the leaders is specific to their role of ERG leaders. And again, it's part of this growing trend, right? As ERGs and Latino ERGs continue to add and have a greater impact, they want to make sure that the ERG leaders are prepared and get as much development as possible to successfully fulfill that role. So thank you for that question. Oh, here we have a question that was pre-submitted by my good friend Alejandro Roman. Alejandro, nice to see you participating in these exchanges. His question is, how can ERGs work together across companies to increase our impact in our industries and in our community? Great question, Alejandro. Not surprising that you asked this question. You're always big on partnerships and collaborations. I guess one of the things I've seen, and this is something that's very close to me personally, is that there are certain groups that have been established across the country where the Latino ERG leaders, say in a metropolitan area, will get together and kind of find ways to kind of benchmark, network, share best practices. For example, I started a group called CLEO, the Consortium of Latino Employee ERGs, and since 2008, my Clio group has been getting the Latino ERGs together in the Chicago area. We just had a Clio meeting last week, or actually earlier this week, I'm sorry, on Monday, that was hosted by Latino Force, the Latino ERG at Salesforce. They hosted an event at their new Chicago Tower location. We had Latino ERG leaders there from about 35 different companies. Again, networking, finding ways to collaborate, sharing trends, best practices, participating in development together. There's a similar group in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm going to do one of these Latino ERG events in Minneapolis tonight, hosted by the Latino ERG in Allianz Life. So if any of you want to become part of that, regular gathering of Latino ERG leaders, just reach out. But even if you want help on how to establish one of those kind of consortiums or groupings, let me know. I've been getting Latino ERGs together. I think it's critically important, and Alejandro, it's probably one of the reasons you asked it, because if you think about it, you're all trying to do the same things, right? So why not share the types of things that you're doing? Maybe there's opportunities for you all to work together on key initiatives. You can learn from each other. Sometimes I've seen some of the larger, more established Latino ERGs partner with some of maybe a newer Latino ERG. I think that's one of the best ways that we can increase our impact, not just within our industry, but help to enhance that greater sense of community that is desperately needed. I think the diversity in the Latino community is part of our strength, but it really won't be part of our power unless we become more united and collaborate a little bit more. So those are some things I would suggest. Get out there, connect with Latino ERGs at other companies, and don't just do it once in a while. Try to establish a regular cadence in operating rhythm. I think that will serve you well. All right, one more question, and I'm going to turn over to Kristin. We have a question here from Carmen Hernandez Romero. Her question is, what are some of the key actions that have more impact on career advancement for Latinx employees? Great question, Carmen. There's a couple things I've seen. One is I'm of the opinion that our Latino community is over-mentored and under-sponsored. By that I mean we get a lot of folks who are giving us advice, and that's what mentors do. Mentors, tell us, hey, here are the ropes. You should do this. You should do less of that. And mentors are great. I've benefited greatly from mentors throughout my career. But mentors talk to you. Sponsors talk about you. And I think that's one of the areas that's maybe slowing our upward mobility and promotional velocity, is we oftentimes don't have sponsors who are advocating for us in those talent reviews. They're not advocating for us when they're in those meetings determining who's going to get that promotion, who's going to get that key assignment. So I think, to answer your question, Carmen, one of the things that Latino ERGs can do is to help elevate the visibility and exposure of their members. So that way they'll start showing up on the radar of more and more senior executives who may then want to sponsor them and advocate for them. So that would be one thing. The second thing is, I think we need to have even stronger leader and professional development. And by that, I mean, leadership development workshops that focus on making us stronger leaders, right? Some of you may be aware that I, co-run the Latino Leadership Intensive Program with my good friend, Angel Gomez. And every year we run that 2-day program that's hosted and every June at Harvard University in Cambridge, and it's hosted every November at Stanford University in Palo Alto. In fact, I'll be doing the 2-day program next week out in Stanford. So, and what those programs do is they look at leadership topics, things like things like decision-making, strategic planning, coaching others, providing feedback, conflict management, but they look at it from a Latino cultural perspective, right? How does our Hispanic heritage influence how we show up? So I would say, Carmen, things like sponsorship and things like, more strategic and robust leadership development that takes into consideration our cultural heritage, I think those are the types of things that can really help advance our career. So thank you for those pre-submitted questions. We're going to get to some of your live questions, but now is the really cool part of the program. I'm going to invite my good friend Kristin Coleman to join us. She's calling in today from the great state of Arizona. As Vianney mentioned earlier, she has a really cool title, Executive Director and Head for Advancing Hispanics and Latinos at JPMorgan Chase. What a cool title. What a cool department. It doesn't surprise me that JPMorgan Chase has a function like that. She's very actively connected with Adelante, their Hispanic employee resource group, and she's agreed to join us to answer at least a couple questions. So Kristin, thanks for joining us. I have a question that was submitted for us that I'd love for you to kind of share your thoughts. The question was submitted by Lauren Collins, and her question is, Latino ERGs usually have a lot of visibility and activity during Hispanic Heritage Month, right? Yeah, I would agree with that. Her question is, what advice do you have to sustain that energy and momentum throughout the year? So, Kristin, love to get your thoughts on that. How do we keep this momentum going throughout the year, not just during Hispanic Heritage Month?
Yes, gracias. And I appreciate you having me. I like to step into a room to say, I'm here to demystify that you know a Latino by the name. So for all my Chicanos out there and others that, again, have to show up differently in spaces, I see you. It's an honor to be here today. I think this question is a really good one. So I have the privilege of leading the strategy for Hispanic Heritage Month for JPMorgan Chase. And I've done that for the last 2 years that I've been in this role. Advancing Hispanics and Latinos is a newer department, but DEI and our Adelante BRG have been here at JPMorgan Chase for over 2 decades. So the work that we get to do now is super strategic. So when we think about Hispanic Heritage Month, it is that now we are being very purposeful to say, when we show up at this global moment, how do we take the stage and showcase the best of our community, the diversity of our community, and really make it more than what historically it has been? So, when I think about, how to sustain the momentum, for one, it's to plan right now for next year how you want to show up in your business and with your ERG, to have a plan. As I think about the fact that for us, it's that our strategy is careers and skills for employees, it's community development, it's business growth, and it's financial health and education. Depending on your industry, you might have 4 different areas. Those are our core pillars that we march to and that we essentially align across all of our DEI businesses, right? Whether it's Latino or any other organization. But we are aligned in making sure that during HHM and throughout what we do, we are marching to the same strategy. So as I think about how to keep the momentum, it's spread it out. Don't have 50 and 100 and 200 events going on during HHM and then wonder why there was no impact. Or, sometimes I like to remind people that what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, right? So if you're thinking about, celebrating the diversity of the community, if you're thinking about demystifying all the different intersections of commonality and who are Latinos and where are we and how do we contribute economically, it's really amplifying all of that throughout the year, taking advantage of all those times and moments where you can showcase all of those different aspects of our community in very intentional ways. So again, every time somebody asks me about this, it's all about do less, but have more impact is what I like to tell people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would say, Kristin, that there's a growing sentiment across Latino ERGs in corporate America where they're taking more of a under-promise, over-deliver approach. They're saying, hey, let's maybe do fewer things, but let's do them much more effectively. Let's focus more on depth versus breadth. But that doesn't mean you can't have events year-round, like you said, right? Spread out your initiatives. Yeah. The other thing I would say that you touched on is that importance of intersectionality, right? So, Latino ERGs can partner with, the women's ERG during Women's, History Month and do a session on what's it like to be a Latina, corporate America. You can partner with the Black ERG during Black History Month on, what's it like to be Afro-Latino. So I think those are other strategies. But I do like the idea that we are starting to have an impact and sustain that visibility throughout the year, not just during those 30 days. So great question or great answer. Let me give you another one.
One thing I'm going to add to
Yes.
this is
Yes.
I think for global organizations, it's really to think about the fact that while it's celebrated and the origin of HHM was in the US, don't miss out on an opportunity to think about a voice from another region, right? So I think for us, as we think about the fact that we operate in 100 countries, we pass the mic during HHM to say, okay, it is your Independence Day. How about you tell us the story? So I think those are the other things, especially for those in the audience that might belong to global organizations. Like that's the way that you elevate the experiences at the same time. So I just didn't want to miss out on that. Quick moment, Robert, for those where it's applicable.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So we have another question submitted here. I can't see who submitted, but it was about executive sponsors. So the question is, most Latino ERGs have an executive sponsor. How does the Latino ERG or Adelante at JPMorgan Chase engage their executive sponsor, and what advice do you have for Latino ERGs in general to have a stronger relationship with their executive sponsors? Love to have you share your thoughts and the approach you take at JPMorgan Chase.
Absolutely. So like I mentioned, JPMorgan Chase is a dinosaur. We're over 200 years old. And for a lot of our ERGs, again, they've been around for a number of years. But what I am proud of that we've changed in just the recent years is that we now have an operating committee member that is the executive sponsor. Now, I think that for other organizations, if you don't have someone senior enough at the table in terms of making decisions, that can be a real challenge. So as I think about just the fact that for our Adelante ERG, BRG, we've got over 30,000 members across the globe. And so our executive sponsor just so happens to be Daniel Pinto, our president and chief operating officer. So I think in terms of the value proposition with our particular sponsor, it's been there because that's his lived experience and journey. And so he gets it dramatically. But we have a lot of sponsors across all of our networks that are allies. They are not part of that community. And I think that going back to our conversation around making it meaningful, driving the B in BRG, which I like to say, those are the things that are going to get your sponsor to really take notice of the type of things that you want to drive and the type of impact that you want to make. So I would say, first of all, have a regular rhythm with your sponsor to really level set and baseline and strategize together to agree on every quarter or every month. This is going to be the rhythm of what's going on. We're going to prepare an agenda. We're going to have a plan that's really going to allow us to operate together. And we need you, right? To your point about, over mentored and under sponsored, that senior leader has the opportunity to move the community forward. And it's incumbent upon us to use every opportunity to be at the table. So I would say that how do you get their attention? Know your stats. I think a lot of us know that, and perhaps some don't know, just because we're Latino doesn't mean that we know all the imperative stats to drop, whether it's the 3.2 trillion in GDP, the 5th largest, 3rd fastest growing economy in the world. Like all of those things will help us move the needle in terms of making sure that our allies and our sponsors know, like, this is exactly, let me help you, right? We're wanting to help ourselves, but at the same time, think about how much we are helping our business, our industry, because we have a lens that is part of this growing economy that can't be denied. So I think that once you have those conversations with your sponsor, it's going to click. So those are the things that we need to come together on to just really make sure that, for one, we have buy-in, they have the senior executive support, and we move the needle for all the things that we want to accomplish. And every company is different in terms of size, capacity, the composition of your ERG, and what job level they are, and what are the things that matter to them the most. That could look wildly different. But at the end of the day, I think that if you center on, again, what is the story? What are the outcomes that we're driving to? And you can agree on those things. That's the kind of magic that will make that sponsorship really elevate your game, whether you're a new ERG or whether you're one that's established that basically needs to reframe, because a lot of it is reframing the narrative around Hispanics and Latinos, right? So that could be one of your priorities that sponsor can really help accelerate for you.
Excellent. And Kristin, because you're on such a roll, and I love your answers, I'm going to give you another one, because I think it's related, right? It was submitted by Carmen Youngstate, just submitted live, but she says, okay, so we've talked about the executive sponsor. She's saying, how do I convince the CEO that what Latino ERGs are doing specifically around the business? So, is there anything you can share of maybe something that Adelante does that catches that attention? We talked in general, but anything specific you can share that really is kind of making a business impact?
Well, what I would say is that we do have, you talked a little bit about having these summits where you bring CEOs to the table or the ERGs to the table. And it really is making sure that when you invite those allies, again, you're having them hear the same message that you are. So if you're having a summit or a conference, something like that, and you're only inviting Latinos to the table, your allies are missing that message. So for us, what we like to do, and again, Jamie Dimon, our CEO, is very active in part of all of our organizations. We actually have a roundtable with him. We have a breakfast that is supported by our senior most Latinos at the firm to really sit down and kind of get some insights, swap ideas. And so we do that, plus make sure that we're hosting things that have the community nuance, and we're inviting other leaders to the table to make sure that they're not missing an opportunity to hear some of this. So as an example, when you talk about the consumer habits, right, consumer buying habits, we will invite business leaders, both internally and externally, to the table to listen to that, because everyone will, again, benefit from having insight to that information. So again, I think that the CEO conversation is critical. So for one, your executive sponsor should have a straight line to the CEO so that essentially they're cascading that up, but also making sure that there are forums to make sure that they're hearing that message. Now, as an ERG, you may not have the power to bring some of those insights. It might be hiring a speaker, hiring someone, we talked about Latitude Ventures, the LDC report, Ana Valdez, Sal Trujillo. You could invite someone to your organization to essentially do a readout of that information. And that would be very compelling in terms of how do you nuance this conversation to where it's really demonstrating the value proposition to your CEO. So again, I think it's whether it's a number of speakers, whether it's the data, the reports, any of those things are ammunition to help us drive and get the buy-in from our senior leaders. So I would just encourage you to think about what influencers, what research can I bring so that it grabs the attention of my CEO.
Love it, love it, love it. Thank you, Kristin. I'm going to answer a few more that were submitted, but stay nearby. I may throw another one your way in a little bit. How's that sound?
Good.
All right, let's see. We have a question here submitted live by Erica. Erica asked, I'm interested in learning if ERGs have gotten in the space of leadership development to supplement what companies are doing at the individual contributor level. What has been a success? So yeah, we do see companies and Latino ERGs, almost provide development opportunities based on where people are in their career, right? So maybe, folks who are at that individual contributor level, you're starting learning your craft. So I've seen things on, communication skills, what sort of communication style do you have? So that way you can be more effective when you communicate. I've seen things like, what's your personal brand? How do you, inform people of the types of things that you do and the value that you provide? I've seen things on like, executive presence, those sorts of things. And then maybe, I've seen Latino ERGs have workshops that are more catered towards people who are in management and director level roles, things like, decision making, conflict management, strategy, development, capital allocation. So development that's focused on, those types of roles. And then I have seen some workshops, for example, for Hispanics who are more senior level roles. I just got done doing a workshop earlier this year for Latinos who want to be on, major nonprofit boards, right? So they want to be on the board of the local ballet, the opera, the Art Institute, the symphony. They're asking, Robert, how do we get on those boards? Those are stepping stones for corporate boards. So, I happen to serve on the board of trustees for the National Museum of Mexican Art. So I shared some of my things. So yeah, I think it is a good practice to have, development programs for people who are at different levels. But regardless of the level, I also am a big believer on workshops on things like Latino identity in the workplace leveraging your Hispanic heritage as an asset and a source of strength, the Latino cultural script, things that are very connected to our culture and our heritage. So thank you for submitting that question. Erica, let's see, we have another question here. Actually, it's a question for Kristin. Kristin, if you're still there, Veronica just submitted a question, and she would love to know, hey, where does your role fit within the org structure of JPMorgan Chase? I'm just fascinated with this, job that you have, kind of the advancing Hispanics and Latinos. So can you share with everybody where that role fits within the company and how it's structured or organized?
Absolutely. So it is the business of Hispanics and Latinos at the firm. So it's not in human resources. Our DEI businesses report into our corporate office. So basically, our function exists to improve the outcomes for our community. So across each of those 4 pillars that I had mentioned, that's actually a business unit for JPMorgan Chase. So we work in partnership with corporate responsibility or with philanthropy, with multiple business areas. But we are our own business, which is fantastic because for me, I've been with JPMorgan Chase for 20 years, and most of that was within human resources. So this is actually the most applicable to my old job that is not human resources. So I think a lot of new organizations are getting smart to say, you need to think about this segmentation from a business perspective. And that's exactly what we are. So proud that this role exists. I like to tell people that all the work that I did as with my Latina privilege, going to college and supporting, different things, I now just do that in corporate America. So it's a real honor that it's a business here at JPMorgan Chase. Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Let's see. I have a question here submitted by Victor Veras. Let's see if I can read it. It says, thank you, Victor, for your question. What are some best practices to engage in intersectional events and initiatives with other ERGs? So we touched on it a bit earlier, Victor. When you think about the diversity in our community, in the Hispanic Latinx community, we could be members of every ERG, right? So I think if we keep that top of mind and we try to be intentional around tapping into that diversity, I think it just creates some natural, ways for us to partner with the other ERGs and address some of that intersectionality, right? We all have multiple dimensions of how we identify. So yeah, whether it's partnering with the Women's ERG to talk about Latina issues, partnering with the Pride ERG to talk about what's it like to be gay in the Hispanic community, the Afro-Latino, partnerships with, the Black ERGs. You can partner with, the Disability ERG and talk about, things like mental health in the Hispanic community. I think the opportunities are there. We have so much diversity in our community that it just, lends into making it easier for us to, collaborate and address those intersectional components. But we have to be intentional. So don't be afraid to reach out to some of your fellow ERG leaders and ask them what they might be able to do to partner. Okay. Let's see here. I'd love to give Kristin one more opportunity to answer. I love your questions. Kristin, if you're still there, we actually have a question submitted by Francia Mesa. Maybe this might be the last question we'll have time for, but it says, allies often want to join the Latino ERG, even though they don't identify as Hispanic, but they want to support the community. In your experience, how can Latino ERGs get more non-Hispanic allies to join? Great question, Francia. Kristin, anything you can share? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize, I somehow lost my video, but I'm here.
That's okay. We can hear you.
As I think about allies, I'm one that, I'm actually multicultural. So I think when we talk about this conversation, I love it because sometimes, people, think that I'm one thing and I show up something different. So I think when it comes to allies, it really is making sure that we create a space to invite them in, and really making sure that we have an opportunity to think about the various ways that it's going to benefit them to be part of the dialogue. So, for us, it's creating a space where in some of our ERGs, we have a role that is allyship is the pillar. It's the work stream to make sure that, we are talking about, as a business leader, what information do you need to get, culturally proximate to leading, being a leader, and recognizing, Latino cultural values, etc. So I think when it comes to inviting those voices in, it's making sure that you're creating the space, being intentional about the way that you're structured, being intentional about the topics. It could just be around allyship that you decide to have a body of work, or it could be constructed that way. So I think that for us, and especially because we have 7 global centers of excellence, to your point, Robert, identify the nuanced needs. When we're trying to be inclusive and go together, this creates a beautiful synergy to invite that in. I will tell you that for us, we have over 300,000 employees, and we actually have over 300,000 ERG members because they belong to multiple, and or we do our work together. So I think this ally conversation is beautiful, because if we're intentional about the way that we're inviting them to the table, inviting them to be part of our structure, being part of the movement, the mission, that's essentially what we're trying to do. I know we don't want to work ourselves out of a job, but I do say that sometimes, that ideal is that we don't need to exist because we're operating with inclusion at all times. But again, I think it's just a matter of, again, being intentional. So
yeah, absolutely. And just to build even further on what you shared, Kristin, we are starting to see many more Latino ERGs even add allies to their name. So they're the Latinx and Allies ERG, the Hispanic and Allies. And they're very much promoting the concept of you don't have to be to belong, right? You don't have to be Hispanic to join the Latino ERGs. And I'm finding that there's so many benefits that you highlighted. Some of the obstacles and headwinds that Hispanics face in the corporate world, we will have difficulty overcoming some of those if we don't have the support from our non-Hispanic allies to help mitigate some of those risks. So absolutely, allies are important. Now, I will say in kind of closing, I do also think that it's not our job to educate non-Hispanic allies on how to be better allies, right? I think we can share with them the benefits, but allies have to do the work, right? We can't have them show up and say, okay, here I am, educate me how I can be a better ally. They have to do the research, they have to read the books, they have to look at their history, they need to get informed, and stuff. So what I'm finding, Latino ERGs are getting pretty good at that. They're saying, okay, don't focus on the verb ally as a noun, like, hey, I proclaim it, I'm a ally to the Latino community. Great, good for you. Latino ERGs, and I think you share this in your answer about, Adelantes, they're saying, hey, don't focus on the noun. We want to focus on ally as a verb. How can we feel your allyship? What are the things you can do to help us feel that you're supporting us? And I think, as we've gotten better at that, we're not only able to attract and embrace more allies, but they're educating themselves on how to be the best allies that they can be. So, Kristin, thank you again. I'm so excited that I asked you to join us. Loved your answers. Very on point. Made us think a little bit. And also, I loved giving you an opportunity to highlight all the great things you're doing at JPMorgan Chase. I'm proud to say I'm a Chase client. That's where I do all my business and personal banking. And the reason I do that is because I want to support those organizations that support our community. So thanks all of you for joining us here today. We're out of time. Both Kristin and I have enjoyed having the honor of being the subject of your grace and favor for the last few minutes. Looks like all of you were very busy in the chat, kind of getting connected. Yes, link in with us, connect with each other, find ways to collaborate. I know we have the holiday season fast approaching. May you all have a happy holiday season, and stay tuned to Hispanic Executive about future Latino ERG exchanges. And if you're not a subscriber to Hispanic Executive magazine, please get out there. It's a great publications, one of the best ones out there. So take care, everybody. con mucho, mucho amor. Chao.